On Christmas Eve, I instinctively reached out to stop my daughter-in-law's Yule log cake from falling. She yanked the tray away, then screamed, "Don't ever put your filthy hands on my things again!" Before I could explain, my own son looked me in the eye and said, "Apologize to her, or walk out of my house." I quietly grabbed my coat and left. 30 minutes later, sitting alone in my truck, my longtime accountant called and whispered, "Don't go home yet. Your son is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Thank you for being here with me." Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what's the weather like where you are right now. Your voice in this space matters more than you know. Quick note, some details in this story have been fictionalized to strengthen the message, but the lesson at its heart is what truly matters. The Yule log cake was already falling before anyone could breathe. But let me back up. At 68, with arthritis swelling my knuckles and snow dusting my old Ford F-15, I pulled into my son's driveway on Christmas Eve, carrying gifts I'd spent months choosing. The model train expansion for Felix, the Victorian dollhouse furniture for Pearl, a bakery box from Schmidt's with their famous Yule log cake buttercream frosting chocolate shavings, the works. And wrapped in silver paper beneath it all, a leather photo album I'd assembled from 7 years of Margaret's pictures. I didn't know this would be my last Christmas, as the father who stayed silent to keep the peace. Brent's house in Westerville blazed with lights, white icicles dripping from the eaves, a wreath the size of a tractor tire on the front door. Through the windows, I could see the living room packed with people. My son had done well for himself. Ashford commercial flooring had grown from the company Margaret and I started in our garage to something that required Christmas parties with valets. I didn't rate a valet. I parked on the street. Grandpa Pearl hit my legs before I made it up the walkway, 8 years old and moving like a cannonball. "Did you bring it? Did you bring the dollhouse stuff?" Pearl let him breathe. That was Felix, 12, and trying to sound responsible, but his eyes went straight to the wrapped box under my arm. "You brought the train, right?" "I brought the train." I handed it over and watched his face light up the way Brent's used to back when a new toy mattered more than a new contract. The warmth lasted about 15 seconds. Celeste appeared in the doorway. 37, perfectly composed, her blonde hair swept into something that probably had a French name. She wore a cream cashmere sweater that cost more than my truck payment, and the smile she reserved for people she tolerated rather than welcomed. Lester. Not Dad. Not even a hug. Just my name flat as a tax form. "You're here. Merry Christmas, Celeste." I offered the bakery box. Yule log from Schmidt's. "I know it's your favorite." She took it the way you'd take a dead fish. "More sugar. The kids have already had enough today." Her eyes flicked to the silver-wrapped album. "What's that?" "Just some photos. Of Margaret. I thought the kids might. Leave it under the tree." She stepped aside to let me in barely. "Brent's in the kitchen. The driveway's full, so you might want to move your truck further down before someone blocks you in." Translation: don't get too comfortable. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon-spiced cider simmering on the stove. 40 people minimum, maybe 50. Brent's business associates in their seasonal sweaters. Celeste's country club friends with their wine glasses and careful laughs. A football game blared from the TV nobody watched. Brent stood near the kitchen archway, 40 years old, and looking like the catalog version of success-pressed khakis navy pullover, the easy confidence of a man who'd forgotten how hard his mother and I worked so he could stand in a house like this. "Dad." He gripped my shoulder, genuine warmth in it. "You made it. Wasn't sure with the snow coming down. Takes more than snow to keep me away." "Good, good." He glanced toward the kitchen where Celeste had disappeared with the cake box. Listen, don't take it personally if tonight's a big deal for her. The Hendersons are here, the Clarks. She's been planning for weeks. I'd been planning too. Planning since July when I'd started sorting through Margaret's photos. But I just nodded. For a second, walking through that front door, smelling wood smoke and cinnamon, hearing my grandchildren laugh, I almost forgot she'd been gone 7 years. Then Celeste emerged from the kitchen, carrying the Yule log cake on a silver platter, and I remembered everything at once. She'd transferred it from the bakery box to her own serving dish. The cake looked beautiful under the dining room chandelier, dark chocolate rolled with cream, dusted with powdered sugar like fresh snow. She moved through the crowd, with it held high conversations parting around her like water. I stood near the kitchen doorway, just standing there, hands in my pockets, trying not to take up space. The platter tilted. Not much, just a slight shift as she navigated around someone's chair. But the cake was heavy, the platter was silver and slick, and I saw it start to slide. Instinct. That's all it was. 68 years of catching things before they fall. I reached out, fingers extending to steady the platter from underneath, just a gentle support to keep it level. Celeste saw my hand coming toward her cake and jerked the platter away. Violently, like I'd reached for her throat, the Yule log launched into the air. For one frozen second it hung there, rotating slowly, chocolate shavings catching the chandelier light. Then gravity remembered its job. Buttercream exploded across the tile. The cake split into 3 pieces, one skidding under the refrigerator, another landing frosting down near the sink. The silver platter hit the floor with a sound like a cymbal crash, spinning until it settled with a final metallic ring. Silence. Then Celeste screamed, "Your dirty hands touched my Christmas cake." She stared at me like I'd committed murder. 30 people in that room, and every single one of them looked at my hands. My clean, arthritic, 68-year-old hands that had built the company her husband now ran, that had paid for half the furniture in this house, that had done nothing but try to help. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. The plate was slipping. I was just trying to... don't. She grabbed paper towels, began furiously wiping the platter. Not the floor, the platter. Like my fingerprints were contamination. "Don't ever put your filthy hands on my things again." The football announcer kept shouting about a 3rd down conversion nobody cared about anymore. Pearl started crying. Felix stood frozen, the train expansion clutched to his chest. Have you ever watched your own dignity fall to the floor in front of 30 people and known, absolutely known, that nothing you say will put it back together? I stood there, hands still raised, slightly frosting, splattered across my shoes, while Celeste scrubbed her platter, and every conversation in that house died mid-sentence. Then I heard footsteps. Every pair of eyes in that crowded house locked onto me. The football announcer kept shouting absurdly loud now. Then Brent stepped into the kitchen doorway, his face unreadable, and for one desperate second, I believed my son would tell his wife she'd overreacted. For one hopeful second, I truly believed my son would tell his wife she'd overreacted. Brent looked at the cake splattered across the floor. Looked at his wife clutching paper towels like weapons. Looked at me standing there with my arthritic hands still half raised, frosting on my shoes. Then he looked only at me. Dad." His voice was quiet, careful. "Apologize." The room held its breath. "I'm sorry, Celeste." I kept my voice steady. "The plate was slipping. I was only trying to help." Celeste's laugh came out sharp. "Help you ruined everything." "I'm sorry," I said again, clearer this time. "I didn't mean to touch your cake." She turned her back to me, still scrubbing the silver platter that didn't need scrubbing anymore. Brent stepped closer, lowered his voice, but not enough. The 40 people in that house heard every word. Either apologize to Celeste properly or leave. Properly. As if I hadn't already said the words twice. as if there was some magic phrasing that would undo the fact that his wife had jerked a cake into the air rather than let my hand steady it. Grandpa. Felix appeared beside me, the train expansion still tucked under his arm. "Aren't you staying for dessert?" Brent put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Everything's fine, buddy. Grandpa was just leaving." Was, not is. Already past tense, as if I'd made the decision myself. I looked at my son, 40 years old. The same boy I'd taught to ride a bike on Maple Street, whose first apartment I'd co-signed when he had more ambition than credit score, who'd called me crying the night his first big contract fell through and I'd driven 2 hours in a thunderstorm to sit with him until dawn. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who'd just chosen Christmas cake over his father. "I could Merry Christmas, Felix," I said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Pearl." Pearl was crying into her mother's sweater. She didn't answer. I put on my coat with deliberate slowness. Gloves next each finger fitted carefully, despite the way my hands wanted to shake. Every person in that living room watched me button up like I was performing for an audience I never auditioned for. The photo album sat under the tree, still wrapped in silver paper. Margaret's face and 73 pictures I'd spent 4 months organizing. The kids would probably use it as a step stool. I didn't say another word. Just walked through the front door into the December cold and let it swing shut behind me. The snow hit my face before I reached the truck. That cold sting was the only real thing I had left to hold on to that night. My F-150 started on the second try engine, coughing in the cold. I let it warm up while my breath fogged the windshield, hands wrapped around the steering wheel just to have something to grip. Through the windows of Brent's house, I could see people moving again, conversations, resuming the party, stitching itself back together now that the embarrassing old man had been removed. I pulled out of the neighborhood, past the houses with their perfect lights and their perfect wreaths and their families who probably weren't throwing anyone out on Christmas Eve. The heater blew cold air, then gradually warmed. My fingers ached around the wheel, arthritis and cold, and something deeper that didn't have a medical name. I drove the same roads I'd driven for 40 years, taught Brent to drive on these streets, taught him to check his mirrors, signal early leave space for the other guy's mistakes, taught him everything I knew about being steady and reliable and present. Apparently, I'd forgotten to teach him loyalty. The album, I slowed the truck without meaning to, foot easing off the gas. The photo album was still under his tree. Margaret's handwriting on the back of half those pictures, dates, locations, little notes about what Pearl had said or how Felix had laughed. 7 years of memories I'd preserved because someone should remember she'd been here. My hand moved toward the turn signal. One U-turn and I could go back, the knock on the door, ask for what was mine. But I didn't turn around because it wasn't about the album. It was about the way Brent had looked at me in that kitchen, not like his father, not even like a stranger. Like I was the problem that needed solving, the stain that needed wiping away so his wife's party could continue unblemished. 40 years I'd spent building something. The garage startup flooring company that became Ashford Commercial. The college fund that paid for his business degree. The weekends teaching him to estimate jobs, read contracts, treat workers with dignity. Every lesson designed so my son would never have to start from nothing the way Margaret and I did. And tonight, he'd spent it all to buy 5 more minutes of peace with his wife. The Kroger parking lot appeared on my right. I didn't plan to pull in. The truck just seemed to drift that direction, tires crunching on snow-dusted asphalt. I shut off the engine, sat there watching last-minute shoppers push carts through the cold. A father carried his young daughter across a puddle so her boots wouldn't get wet. A teenager loaded bags into a trunk while his mother waited in the warm car. Ordinary people doing ordinary things on Christmas Eve, none of them recently expelled from their own son's house for the crime of trying to help. Have you ever cried so hard you didn't notice until your windshield fogged up and you couldn't see the road home? That's when my phone buzzed, not a text. The longer vibration of a voicemail. I stared at the screen through blurred vision, breath still catching in my throat. The caller ID said Joyce Sutton. Joyce Sutton, my 62-year-old accountant for 3 decades, who managed my taxes and retirement accounts and the property holdings I'd set up back when Margaret was alive. Joyce, who never called after business hours, who definitely never called on Christmas Eve, who'd probably left for her daughter's house in Cleveland by noon. But there was her name, her number, her voicemail waiting. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve and stared at that notification like it might explain itself. Joyce never called on Christmas Eve unless something was very, very wrong. I pressed play. Joyce's voice was calm and professional, but calling me on Christmas Eve meant only one thing: something was very wrong. Lester, it's Joyce. Merry Christmas. I know the timing is terrible, but I need you to call me. A pause. Background noise like she was in her car. It's about the property documents. Brent still hasn't signed the year-end paperwork I sent him 3 weeks ago. The ones acknowledging the ownership structure for Ashford Property Holdings. I turned up the volume, pressing the phone harder against my ear. But that's not the main issue. The main issue is... Another pause, longer this time. In 2 meetings this week, one with a lender, one with his expansion team, he talked about the warehouse like it belongs to the company. Not to Property Holdings, to the company. As in Ashford Commercial Flooring. My chest tightened. I don't know if it's confusion or if someone's been giving him bad advice, but we need to clear this up before someone makes a very expensive mistake. Call me when you can. Even tomorrow. I'll have my phone. The voicemail ended. I sat there in the dark parking lot, engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. Then I played it again. He talked about the warehouse like it belongs to the company. Then a third time, before someone makes a very expensive mistake. The cake. Celeste's screaming. Brent ordering me out of his house on Christmas Eve. It wasn't just about dirty hands on dessert. It was about something bigger, something that had been growing in the shadows for months, maybe years, while I'd been too polite, too grateful for invitations to family dinners, too afraid of causing friction to ask the questions a father should ask. 7 years. 7 years since Margaret died, and I'd signed over the business operations to Brent. 7 years of him running Ashford Commercial Flooring, while I kept the property separate, Ashford Property Holdings, LLC, the entity that actually owned the warehouse. The land, the assets that mattered. Separate. That was the whole point. Margaret and I had set it up that way deliberately back when lawyers still charged reasonable rates, and we could afford to plan ahead. But somewhere along the line, my son had started believing, or worse, telling other people, that the warehouse was his. I drove home with Joyce's words echoing louder than the heater blowing warm air against the windshield. The last 7 years weren't generosity, they were invisibility. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Same house Margaret and I bought in 1981, same porch, where we'd watched both boys learn to ride bikes, same kitchen, where we'd calculated invoices at 2 in the morning and promised each other it would all be worth it someday. It was 9:30 on Christmas Eve and I was alone. I hung my coat, brewed a pot of coffee I didn't need but wanted anyway. Then I went to the home office, Margaret's craft room before cancer took her, and opened the closet. The gray metal file box sat on the top shelf, exactly where I'd left it 3 years ago. We'd bought it together in 2004, the year the company started making real money. Margaret had labeled it, in her neat handwriting, Property Holdings Important. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down. The lock clicked open. Inside, everything was exactly as organized as she'd left it. Margaret never did anything halfway. First folder, the deed. Ashford Property Holdings, LLC. Purchased the warehouse property in 2006 for $240,000. Current estimated value according to the last assessment, $2.8 million. Second folder, the occupancy agreement. Brent's signature at the bottom, dated 7 years ago, right after Margaret's funeral. The document that let Ashford Commercial Flooring operate out of the warehouse in exchange for maintaining the facility and covering utilities. No rent. I'd never charged him rent. It was his mother's company too, and I wanted him to succeed. Third folder, tax statements. Property taxes I'd paid alone. Every year, every single year for 7 years, while Brent ran his business out of a building he apparently thought he owned. Fourth folder, maintenance records. The roof replacement 3 years ago, $47,000. The parking lot repaving. Security camera upgrades after the break-in on 5th Street. The heating system that died during that polar vortex winter and cost $18,000 to replace on an emergency weekend call. Every folder was a memory. Every receipt was proof of something Brent had never asked about, never offered to help with, never acknowledged. I pulled out the insurance renewals, the inspection reports, the utility setup documents from 2006 when Margaret and I had stood in that empty warehouse and imagined what it could become. She knew, even then she knew. Margaret, my wife of 42 years, gone 7 years now to cancer, had insisted we keep the property separate, had insisted on the LLC, had insisted we document everything even when I'd argued it was just us and the boys, that family didn't need lawyers and liability protection. Family's exactly who needs it, she'd said. I'd thought she was being paranoid. Have you ever opened a box and found proof that someone you loved saw your future more clearly than you did? I was pulling out the last folder, something labeled 2015 MISC, when a small slip of paper fell from between 2 manila dividers. It fluttered down onto the table, landing face up beside my cold coffee. Handwriting, Margaret's handwriting. I recognized it instantly, small, precise, the loops on her lowercase g always slightly tilted left. She'd been dead 7 years. But this note, tucked between property files like a bookmark holding a place she knew I'd eventually reach, was written when she still had time to warn me. My hands forgot how to be steady. The note was small, torn from a notepad we used to keep by the kitchen phone. The same notepad where she'd written grocery lists and birthday reminders, and the names of contractors who'd done good work. But this wasn't a grocery list. I unfolded it slowly, the paper soft with age, and began to read. Margaret's first line was written in handwriting shakier than I remembered. Lester, if you're reading this, it means you finally opened the box. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd calculated invoices 40 years ago, where we'd argued about taking loans we couldn't afford, and celebrated contracts we'd never expected to win. The paper was thin, yellowed at the edges. She'd written this during the last 6 months when her hands had started trembling from the medication. I'm leaving this here because you won't listen if I say it out loud. You never did when it came to the boys. So I'm writing it down, and you can't interrupt or tell me I'm worrying too much. Even dead 7 years, she knew me too well. Promise me one thing. Don't give Brent everything. Not because he isn't capable, he is. Not because he doesn't deserve it, he does. But because capable people learn the wrong lessons when life becomes too easy. I read that line twice. If someone never has to ask what something costs, eventually they forget somebody paid for it. If someone never has to earn permission, eventually they forget what respect looks like. I'm not saying make him beg. I'm saying keep the property. Keep something that matters. Keep something that requires him to ask. The words blurred. I blinked, wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I know what you're thinking, that I'm being cruel, that I don't trust our son. That's not it. I trust him to be exactly what we raised him, to be smart, ambitious, capable of building something extraordinary. But I also know that you'll want to make everything easy for him, because that's who you are. You'll want to smooth every path, because you remember how hard ours was. She'd understood me completely. Don't. Let him stumble a little. Let him have to ask for help sometimes. Let him understand that ownership means responsibility, not just profit. Because if you hand him everything and ask for nothing someday, he'll stand in front of you and genuinely believe he earned it all himself. And that's when you'll lose him. I read the note a second time slower. The first reading I thought she'd worried too much. Margaret always saw problems before they arrived, planned for disasters that never happened. The second reading I realized she'd been entirely right. About everything. The third reading I understood that I'd broken my promise not about the property itself, but about letting my son learn true responsibility. I'd given him the business, never charged rent, paid for every repair and tax bill and insurance premium, without ever asking if he'd noticed, if he'd wondered, if he cared. I'd made everything so easy that he'd forgotten someone was paying for it. She saw this coming. I whispered to the empty kitchen. 7 years ago, and I promised her I'd listen. But I hadn't opened the box. Not for 3 years. Not until Joyce's voicemail forced me to remember it existed. I folded the note carefully, placed it back in the file box, and closed the lid. The kitchen felt emptier than it had any right to be. No tree in the living room this year. No stockings, no Margaret humming while she pretended not to shake presents. Just me and the truth I'd spent 7 years avoiding. Christmas morning arrived with only the furnace breaking the silence. I made scrambled eggs because that's what you do on Christmas. When you're alone, you make breakfast and pretend it's just another day. Ate 2 bites. Refrigerated the rest. The house was too quiet. I turned on the television. Some movie about a family solving all their problems before dessert. I turned it off. My phone buzzed. A photo. Felix holding up the model train expansion track pieces spread across what looked like Brent's dining room table. The text underneath. "Thanks, Grandpa. It's awesome. Love you." 30 seconds later, another photo. Pearl wearing the Victorian dollhouse furniture like jewelry, a tiny chair balanced on her head. "Merry Christmas." Both messages sent from Brent's phone. Both from the grandchildren. Not a single word from my son. I stared at the screen. Set it face down on the counter. Looked at the gray file box still sitting on the kitchen table. The grandchildren remembered. Their father didn't. I opened the box again. This time not from grief, but to study. I put on my reading glasses, the ones Margaret used to hide when she thought I needed stronger ones, and pulled out the occupancy agreement. 7 pages printed on the legal letterhead of Morrison and Associates, the firm that had handled our estate planning, back when we could still afford their hourly rate. I'd signed this document the week after Margaret's funeral. Handed over the business operations to Brent, kept the property separate. I remembered signing it. Remembered thinking it was just paperwork, just formality, that family didn't really need lawyers and clauses and protection. But I'd never read it. Not really. Just skimmed for the signature line and trusted that Morrison had written something reasonable. How many times had I signed documents without reading them, trusting that the people I loved would do the same? I started at the top. Read every word. Page 1, definitions. Property holdings, commercial, flooring, occupancy terms. Page 2, utility responsibilities, maintenance obligations, insurance requirements. Page 3, modification procedures, dispute resolution, termination conditions. Page 4, paragraph 7, final sentence. The property may not be used as collateral or financing security without written permission from the owner. I stopped. Write it again. The property may not be used as collateral or financing security without written permission from the owner. Below that sentence in the acknowledgement section, Brent's signature. Blue ink, the same confident scrawl he'd had since high school. And below his signature, typed in 10-point font, I acknowledge that I have read and understand all terms of this agreement. 7 years ago, sitting in that lawyer's office 3 days after we'd buried his mother, my son had signed his name to a document that explicitly, in plain English, no legal jargon, prohibited him from using the warehouse as collateral for anything. And according to Joyce's voicemail, he'd been telling lenders it was already his. I called Joyce the morning after Christmas. I need to see everything, I said. I know, she replied. Clintonville Diner, 11 tomorrow. She had the envelope open on the table before the waitress even poured our coffee. The Clintonville Diner hadn't changed since the 1980s. Same red vinyl booths, same laminate tables, same smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee that somehow felt comforting instead of tired. The waitress Donna had been working there longer than most marriages lasted. She knew both of us well enough to bring coffee without asking and leave the pot. Joyce Sutton. My 62-year-old accountant slid into the booth across from me with a thick manila envelope and the expression of someone who'd been waiting years to have a difficult conversation. Her gray hair was pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn since I'd met her 3 decades ago. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. You look terrible, she said. Merry Christmas to you too. I mean it. She pushed the envelope toward me. When's the last time you slept? Tuesday. She nodded like that made sense, then pulled a spreadsheet from the envelope and unfolded it across the table. Multi-column, color-coded. The kind of meticulous documentation that made Joyce worth every penny I paid her. 7 years, she said, tapping the header row. Every property expense related to Ashford Property Holdings, every invoice, every tax payment, every insurance premium. I leaned forward, put on my reading glasses. The first column dates, the second description, the third amounts, property taxes, insurance. Roof replacement $47,000 3 years ago when that ice storm tore half the shingles off. Parking lot repaving after the city cited us for cracks, $12,500. Drain repairs after spring flooding. Security camera upgrades when the warehouse 2 blocks over got broken into. Heating system replacement during that polar vortex winter. Every line was a memory I'd tried not to think about too hard. You knew you were covering expenses, Joyce said quietly. I don't think you realized how many. I scrolled down and down. 7 years of maintenance repairs, upgrades, compliance costs. The final line bolded in red. Estimated market rent for given 7 years, $294,000. I stopped breathing. Shutizada, that's not including the expenses, Joyce said. That's just what you could have charged in rent if you'd treated him like any other tenant. Fair market value comparable properties in the same industrial district. Nearly $300,000 in rent alone. Does Brent know? My voice came out hoarse. Joyce looked at me over her glasses. I honestly don't think so. How could he not know? Because I think he's repeated the same story for so long that he actually believes it. What story? That the warehouse is basically already his. That you're just keeping your name on the paperwork out of sentiment. That it's a formality you'll fix eventually. 7 years of receipts, 7 years of silence. Every invoice a question Brent never thought to ask. I folded the spreadsheet carefully, hands steadier than I expected. Is there more? Joyce hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Oh, there's one more thing. She pulled a second document from the envelope. I've been waiting for the right time to show you. Probably should have done it weeks ago, but I kept hoping I was wrong. She slid it across the table. A 12-page presentation deck professionally bound, bearing the First Commerce Bank Columbus logo across the top. The title page read, Ashford Commercial Flooring Cincinnati Market Expansion Proposal. Brent's name in the author field. I flipped to page 2. Financial Overview, Revenue Projections. Growth Strategy. Page 3, section header, Asset Position. I read the paragraph twice to make sure I understood it. Company-owned warehouse and office facility at 1247 Industrial Parkway provides strong, debt-free collateral base for proposed expansion financing. Current estimated value $2.8 million. Facility purchased 2006, fully paid, no encumbrances, company-owned. Debt-free collateral, no encumbrances. Every word was a lie. He can't actually believe he owns it, I said. Joyce's silence was answer enough. The bank hasn't approved anything yet, she said finally. But when they request proof of ownership, and they will, because that's how underwriting works, Brent won't be able to provide it. The deed's in your name. The LLC documents list you as sole member. Every tax record for 7 years shows Ashford Property Holdings, not Ashford Commercial Flooring. What happens then? Best case. The bank declines the loan, and Brent's expansion dies. Worst case. She took off her glasses, cleaned them on her napkin. Brent submits fraudulent documents claiming ownership. That's a crime. And if the bank discovers it after approving the loan, they'll demand immediate repayment. All of it. I looked out the window. Rain had started light, but steady. A father was carrying his young daughter across the wet parking lot, holding her against his chest so her shoes wouldn't get soaked. She was laughing, pointing at puddles. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. Joyce nodded. I know. I just... My voice caught. I don't think I can keep pretending everything's fine, that Christmas Eve didn't happen, that I'm supposed to smile and nod while he tells people he owns property he's never paid a cent to maintain. I've been waiting a long time to hear you say that. How do you protect someone who doesn't know they need protecting, especially when the threat is their own ambition? Joyce put the documents back in the envelope, slid it toward me. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Lester, you need a lawyer. I know. Not me. A real lawyer. Someone who specializes in this. I know. She wrote a name and number on a napkin. Preston Ballard. He handled my sister's estate dispute last year. He's expensive, but he's careful. Tell him I sent you. I folded the napkin, put it in my wallet next to the receipt from Schmidt's Bakery, the Yule log cake that had started all of this. Or maybe just revealed what had been building for years. That afternoon, I drove straight home instead of going to the warehouse, like I usually did on Thursdays. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes before walking inside, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, trying to find the words for what I needed to say. Then I went inside and called Preston Ballard. By the time he answered, I'd already decided I couldn't give Brent what Margaret warned me not to give him, a life without consequences. Preston Ballard answered on the second ring. This is Preston. Mr. Ballard, my name is Lester Ashford. Joyce Sutton gave me your number. I need help with a property matter. Family or business? Both, I said. It's both. 3 days later, I sat in his office overlooking High Street. Preston Ballard, 58, and unflappable. Already had my file open on his desk before I took my coat off. His office occupied the 4th floor of an older brick building, the kind with high ceilings and crown molding that newer construction never bothered with. Law books lined the walls. A window overlooked the morning traffic below. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Preston's first question wasn't about property law or lease agreements. It was about whether I was here because my son had hurt my feelings. Are you here because your son hurt your feelings? He asked. Not unkindly, just direct. I'd been expecting legal questions. Documents, technicalities. Nope, I said slowly. I'm here because I finally realized I've been confusing generosity with responsibility. Preston nodded, once a slow, deliberate movement. That gives us room to think instead of react. Tell me about the property. I told him everything. The warehouse, the LLC. Margaret's insistence on keeping it separate. The 7 years of maintenance and taxes I'd paid alone. The occupancy agreement Brent signed but apparently never read. Joyce's spreadsheet. The Cincinnati expansion proposal listing property he didn't own as company collateral. Preston took notes in precise handwriting, asking clarifying questions every few minutes. When I finished, he set down his pen. You have 3 options, he said. First, do nothing. Let this play out. Wait for the bank to discover the ownership discrepancy, watch your son's expansion fail, possibly watch him face fraud allegations. No, I didn't think so. Second option, sell him the property outright. If he qualifies for financing on his own merits, you transfer the deed, walk away clean. He gets what he thinks he already has. I shook my head. Margaret warned me not to give him everything. Then we come to option 3. Preston pulled a folder from his desk drawer. Commercial lease, standard terms, 3-year initial period renewable. Rent set at 10% below market value that's generous without being invisible. Clear division of maintenance responsibilities. 90-day termination notice on either side. Purchase option after 2 years based on independent appraisal. He slid the folder across the desk. No back rent. He continued. No penalties for the past 7 years. We treat this as a fresh start, not a punishment for previous assumptions. I opened the folder, put on my reading glasses. Read slowly. Every clause, every paragraph, every specification. The language was clear, fair. It gave Brent security, 3 years guaranteed, while acknowledging that the property wasn't his gift to claim. This is fair, I said finally. It is. It doesn't punish him. No. Preston's voice was quiet. It simply ends the family discount. Signing my name next to Preston's notary seal felt less like closing a door and more like finally reading the instruction manual for one I'd been walking through blindly for 7 years. You understand, Preston said as I stood to leave. He'll see this as punishment. I know. He'll be angry. I know that too. Preston walked me to the door. When he calls, and he will call, don't argue. Don't defend. Just tell him the lease terms are non-negotiable, and if he has questions, he can contact me directly. I shook his hand and walked out into the December cold. The certified letter arrived at Brent's office on January 2nd. I knew the exact moment it was opened because my phone started ringing 22 minutes later. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating chicken noodle soup, the kind from a can that Margaret used to make from scratch, but I'd never learned. The phone buzzed against the table. Brent's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, the notification appeared. I pressed play. Dad, what is this? Brent's voice, confused more than angry. I just got some certified letter about a commercial lease for the warehouse. Call me. I set the phone down, took another spoonful of soup. The second call came 15 minutes later. This has to be some mistake. Some paperwork mix-up. Obviously, you're not seriously, just call me back. Please. Third call 30 minutes after that. You need to explain what's going on. I've been running my business out of that building for 7 years. You can't just suddenly, pause. Call me. Fourth call an hour later. The tone had shifted. Answer your phone. I don't know what you think you're doing, but we need to talk about this, now. I sat at the table phone, vibrating with each call, and let them all go to voicemail. Not from spite, not from revenge, but because neither of us was ready to have this conversation while emotion was driving the car. I washed my soup bowl methodically, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, walked to the living room and sat in Margaret's old reading chair, the floral one she'd loved, and I'd never had the heart to replace. The phone sat on the coffee table in front of me. Margaret's chair still smelled faintly of her lavender hand lotion, the one detail I couldn't bring myself to erase, even after 7 years of sitting alone. I thought about Christmas Eve, the cake hitting the floor, Celeste screaming about my dirty hands, Brent standing in that doorway choosing his wife's hysteria over his father's dignity. I thought about Margaret's note. Let him have to ask for help sometimes. I thought about Joyce's spreadsheet, nearly $300,000 in forgiven rent. I thought about the blue ink of Brent's signature below a clause he'd never bothered to read. Property may not be used as collateral without written permission from the owner. The fifth call came just after lunch. My hand hovered over the phone for 3 long seconds, long enough to remember the cake crashing, Margaret's warning, Joyce's spreadsheet, and that blue ink signature on a document Brent had treated as a formality. This time I picked up. "Hello, Brent." Brent didn't wait for me to say hello. His voice came through tight and accusing the second I picked up. "What are you doing?" I sat back in Margaret's chair, phone pressed to my ear. "Hello, Brent." "Don't." His voice shook. "Don't act like this is a normal conversation. What is this lease? Why are you seriously doing this?" "It's a fair arrangement. Fair, I know." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You throw me out of your house on Christmas Eve, and now you're charging me rent on property that's been part of the company for 7 years. The property was never part of the company. This is because Celeste got upset over that cake." "No. Come on, Dad. You're punishing me because—" "No, Brent." I kept my voice steady. "This has nothing to do with Christmas Eve." "Then what, you wake up one day and decide after 7 years that you want to be my landlord?" I took a breath. Let it out slowly. "You gave a presentation to First Commerce Bank. Listed the warehouse as company-owned collateral." Silence. "Joyce sent you the deck," he said finally. "Joyce is my accountant. She's supposed to tell me when someone's claiming to own my property." He stopped, started again. "You gave me the company, so the property goes with it. That's how it works. Have you ever looked at the deed?" "What?" "The deed. To the warehouse. Have you ever read it?" Another pause. "Why would I?" "Because it has your signature on the occupancy agreement. Right below a clause that says you can't use the property as collateral without my written permission. I signed whatever you and Joyce put in front of me." His voice shifted, defensive now. "You always handled that stuff. The paperwork, the legal things. I was running the actual business." "That's exactly the problem." "What problem?" "That I trusted you. That you never asked what you were signing. Never wondered who owned what. Never questioned whether any of it mattered." "Because it didn't matter," he was shouting now. "It's all family. It's supposed to stay together." "Then you should have read the documents." The line went dead before I could say another word. 40 years of teaching him the business reduced to a dial tone and the hollow echo of my own breathing. I set the phone down, stared at it for a long time. Then the calls started coming from everyone else. Aunt Linda was first. Margaret's older sister, 71, and speaking with the absolute certainty of someone who'd outlived most of her generation and never once questioned her own judgment. "He's your son," she said without preamble. "I know. And don't destroy his business over Christmas." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm offering him a lease." "That's not what I'm hearing." Her voice hardened. "People are talking, Lester. The whole family's talking. You kicked him out on Christmas Eve, now you're taking his building. It's my building. Jaya, and you know that's not what people are saying." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen, holding the phone, understanding for the first time that somewhere behind the scenes a narrative was being written about me, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. Russell called the next day. My son Russell, 43, and careful, spoke with the measured diplomacy of a man trying to keep peace in a family he didn't fully understand, was breaking. "Brent called me, he said. I figured he would. He says you're trying to force him out. I'm offering him a lease. 3 years guaranteed. Fair terms. 10% below market." "Is that really necessary?" The question landed heavier than he probably meant it. "You've always said the business would stay in the family." Russell continued. "That's what you and Mom wanted. Right? It will stay in the family." "Then why now? Why this? Why?" He paused. "After everything you've given him, why suddenly make it transactional?" "Because I waited too long." Russell went quiet. I could hear him breathing, trying to understand. "And too long for what?" I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. I just know that if I wait any longer, it'll be too late to fix. Fix what, Dad? How many times had I answered, because I waited too long, to explain something I still couldn't fully articulate, as if repetition would make the truth clearer. I need to go, I said. Russell sighed. He's scared. You know that, right? He's scared you're taking away everything he's built. I'm not taking anything. I'm asking him to acknowledge what was always true. Maybe to you. But he didn't know Dad. He genuinely thought. I know what he thought. That's why we're here. I hung up before the conversation could circle back to the same questions I couldn't answer. 2 more calls came over the next day. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly very concerned about family unity. About whether I'd thought this through. About what Mom would have wanted. Margaret's name in their mouths felt like theft. That afternoon, a new email arrived. I was making coffee when my laptop chimed. I almost ignored it, probably another invoice, another reminder, another piece of automated correspondence that could wait. But the subject line caught my eye, concern about Dad. Sender Brent Ashford. Recipients CC'd. Russell, Aunt Linda, 2 cousins I barely knew, Walter and Diane Clark, Celeste's parents, and several others. 14 people total. My hand froze on the coffee pot. I set it down carefully, walked to the laptop, clicked the email open. The first line read, I'm writing to you all because I'm deeply concerned about some changes in Dad's behavior since Mom passed, and I think he may need our help. I read it again. Then again. Changes in Dad's behavior. May need our help. Every word was carefully chosen. Every sentence designed to sound reasonable, concerned, loving. But underneath the careful phrasing was something else entirely. My son wasn't just fighting the lease. He was questioning whether I was still competent to manage my own affairs. The email was written carefully, almost clinically, like Brent had workshopped every word with someone who understood exactly how to make doubt sound like concern. The opening paragraph established the tone, reasonable, loving, reluctantly necessary. I kept reading. Over the past few months, he's been making decisions based on emotion rather than reason. He's become increasingly difficult to communicate with, and when I try to discuss business matters, he either shuts down or reacts with anger that seems out of proportion to the situation. My hands went cold. The most recent example, he's suddenly demanding I sign a commercial lease for the warehouse, where I've been running Ashford commercial flooring for 7 years. This came completely out of nowhere right after a minor disagreement at Christmas. It feels reactive and punitive rather than based in any business logic. Minor disagreement. That's what Christmas Eve had become. The final paragraph I read 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. I'm genuinely concerned he may no longer be able to manage complex business and legal matters without additional support. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I love him and I'm worried. Has anyone else noticed these changes? I think we need to have a family conversation about how to help him through this difficult time. I closed the laptop. Not angry, stunned. 68 years old, and my own son had just told 14 people I couldn't be trusted with my own mind. I sat there for a long time, the office growing dark around me, trying to process what I'd just read. This wasn't about the lease anymore. This wasn't even about the warehouse. Brent was weaponizing my age. I picked up the phone and called Preston. He answered on the first ring like he'd been expecting this. What happened? Group email, I said. Sent to 14 family members. Claims I'm making emotional decisions, can't manage complex matters, need additional support. Forward it to me right now. I did. Heard him reading on the other end of the line, the silence stretching. Lester. He said finally, voice careful and controlled. Under Ohio's Elder Financial Exploitation statutes, any action aimed at exerting financial pressure on someone 60 or older to force them to surrender property rights, including attacking their cognitive competence to family members, can constitute exploitation. I gripped the phone tighter. Brent's email combined with Celeste's actions, and this lease resistance fits a textbook pattern. If they try to present you with any standard paperwork to sign power of attorney property transfers, anything, this email becomes evidence of their intent. What do? Document everything. Keep hard copies of all emails, voicemails, texts. If anyone in the family tries to pressure you about your competence or suggests you need help managing your affairs, record the date and what was said. And crucially, sign absolutely nothing unless I am physically present in the room. Okay, one more thing. Preston's voice softened slightly. Get a medical evaluation. Full cognitive assessment. Not because I think you need one, because you need documentation that you don't. Somewhere between the lawyer's shield and the doctor's signature. I'd stopped being the man who apologized twice for touching a cake. I'd become someone worth protecting. "Do you have a shield, Lester?" Preston said. "Use it." For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt like I wasn't defending myself alone in the dark. 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Catherine Hayes's examination room. Dr. Hayes, who'd been my physician for over 15 years, greeted me with the same calm efficiency she'd shown through every minor ailment and major scare since Margaret's diagnosis. She was in her mid-50s, gray-streaked hair, pulled-back reading glasses perched on her head. "Lester." She glanced at her tablet. "You're not due for a checkup until March. What brings you in?" "I need a comprehensive exam," I said. "Full cognitive assessment, everything." Her eyebrows rose. "Are you experiencing symptoms?" "No. But I need documentation that I'm not." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Let's get started." The exam took under an hour. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but nothing dangerous. Arthritis in my hands, standard for 68, manageable with over-the-counter medication. Hearing no significant changes from last year. Vision, same prescription, still functional. Then the cognitive portion. Memory tests. Pattern recognition. Problem-solving exercises. Following multi-step instructions. Recalling lists of words. Drawing clock faces and identifying images. Dr. Hayes reviewed the results, then looked up with a small smile. "Lester, you're in better shape than half the men 10 years younger than you. Your cognitive function is perfectly normal for your age, actually above average in several areas. What brought you in today, really," I met her eyes. "My son suggested I might be losing my grip." The smile vanished. "Your son." She set down her tablet. "The one who runs the flooring company." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then her professional assessment came swift and certain. "Speaking professionally, you're stubborn, Lester, not senile. There's a significant difference." She turned to her computer, began typing. "I'm writing you a formal report. Official letterhead, my signature, today's date. It will state clearly that you demonstrate full cognitive capacity and decision-making ability consistent with a healthy adult of your age. Thank you, Stietent and Lester." She looked at me over her glasses. "If your son is questioning your competence because you're setting boundaries he doesn't like, that says more about him than it does about you." I walked to the parking lot 15 minutes later, holding an official signed, stamped medical report, and immediately called Preston. "I have the medical report." "Perfect," he said. "File it with the rest." That evening, my tablet chimed incoming video call. I glanced at the screen, saw the name, and answered immediately. Felix's face filled the screen, his bedroom visible behind him. The hum of a vacuum cleaner ran somewhere in the background. He was 12, but the expression on his face belonged to someone much older. His first words weren't, "Hi, Grandpa." They were, "You okay?" Felix's first words weren't, "Hi, Grandpa." They were, "You okay?" And the weight of that simple question nearly broke me. "I'm okay, buddy." I adjusted the tablet, settled deeper into the couch. "How are you?" He shrugged, 12 years old, and already learning to hide worry behind casual gestures. Behind him, I could see his bedroom posters on the wall, the vacuum cleaner humming somewhere down the hall. "You haven't come over," he said. The accusation was gentle but landed hard. "I know. Adults sometimes need to figure things out. Dad says everyone's just busy." Felix picked at the edge of his desk. "Are you busy with what? Are you mad at Dad?" I took a breath, let it out slowly. "I'm disappointed. Is that different?" The question deserved a real answer. "When you're angry," I said carefully, "you stop listening. You just want to be right. When you're disappointed, you still hope things can get better. You're still waiting for the other person to understand." Felix absorbed this with the gravity children bring to lessons they know matter. "So you're waiting for Dad to understand something?" "Yeah, buddy, I am." He nodded. Then his face brightened slightly. "I finished the train. Want to see?" "Absolutely." He turned the tablet, panned the camera across his desk. The model train expansion I'd given him Christmas Eve was fully assembled track pieces forming an elaborate loop around books and desk organizers. A tiny locomotive sat ready on the rails. "It took me 3 days," he said, pride obvious. "But I did it all myself." "That's incredible, Felix. And so you'll come see it in person?" The hope in his voice was unbearable. "I hope so, buddy." "When?" "I don't know yet." We talked for a few more minutes. School his science project, whether the Browns would ever make the playoffs. Normal grandfather-grandson conversation that felt like standing on the edge of something I was about to lose. When we hung up, I stared at the blank tablet screen for 10 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Preston. Subject: let's cancel everything. Body: maybe family matters more than paperwork. Maybe swallowing pride is simply part of getting older. Call me tomorrow and we'll figure out how to walk this back. My finger hovered over send. 40 years of being a father, condensed into the space between intention and action, 10 minutes. Staring at a blank tablet screen, then another 10 with my finger hovering over the button that would surrender everything Margaret warned me to protect. The phone rang. Joyce's name on the screen. I answered, finger still hovering over the email. Lester. Her voice was tight with something between excitement and urgency. "I need to tell you something. First Commerce Bank initiated due diligence on Brent's Cincinnati expansion loan today." I pulled my hand away from the laptop. "What does that mean?" It means they've ordered a title search on all the assets he listed as collateral. Standard procedure. They verify everything before approving large commercial loans." My chest tightened. The warehouse. The warehouse will show up under Ashford Property Holdings, not Ashford Commercial Flooring. Standard timeline for this kind of search is 1 to 2 weeks. When the bank contacts Brent to ask for the proper documents, he won't be able to provide them. Exactly. I stood up, paced to the window. Snow was falling again, light and steady. Does Brent know? Not yet. The bank doesn't typically notify applicants when they initiate due diligence. They just do it. Joyce paused. He's already been calling me. About what? Asking why I haven't provided the ownership documents to the bank. Saying I'm making this harder than it needs to be. I think... She hesitated. I don't think he intentionally lied to them, Lester. I think he's repeated the story so long that he genuinely believes the warehouse belongs to the company. That doesn't make it better. No, it makes it worse. Because now he can't understand why the documents don't exist to prove what he's claiming. I looked at my laptop at the unsent email that would have handed Brent exactly what he wanted, without him ever having to face what he'd done. Joyce, I said quietly. This stopped being a family disagreement the moment my property was used to make the company appear stronger than it actually is. Right. I needed to hear that. I know. Her voice softened. How are you holding up? I almost canceled everything tonight. What stopped you? You did. This call. We shared a laugh. Not cruel, just the relief of two people who'd been holding their breath for weeks. Have you ever felt relief and guilt arrive in the same breath? Grateful the decision is being made for you, ashamed you'd almost chosen wrong. Shitikuan, the bank will find the truth, Joyce said. Whether you pursue this or not, whether you maintain the lease or tear it up, the bank is going to discover that Brent doesn't own what he claims to own, and they're going to want answers. 1 to 2 weeks, give or take, could be sooner if they prioritize it, could be longer if they're backlogged. I closed the laptop without sending the email. Didn't even save it as a draft. Just closed it and let the words disappear. The truth is already on its way, Joyce said quietly. You don't have to carry it anymore. After we hung up, I sat in Margaret's chair and felt something I hadn't felt since Christmas Eve. Not happiness, but the absence of the constant weight pressing down on my chest. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. But the next morning at 10 o'clock, I heard an unfamiliar engine idling in my driveway. Not Brent's SUV. Something smaller, quieter. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Celeste was climbing out of her car alone, carrying a black leather folder. I didn't open the door right away. Celeste stood on my porch in a cream wool coat and leather gloves, the black folder tucked under one arm. Her smile was the practiced kind that doesn't reach the eyes, professional, composed, completely empty of anything resembling warmth or apology. Lester. She nodded once. Do you have a few minutes? Buddy, for what? Well, just some paperwork. Our financial consultant prepared a few things. I thought it would be easier to bring them by than try to coordinate schedules. I stepped aside. Let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Margaret and I used to balance checkbooks and argue about whether we could afford the second truck. Celeste set the folder down, carefully smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her coat. I offered. But no thank you. This won't take long. She opened the folder with calm confidence. Our consultant prepared this property ownership clarification, just to formalize the records for the bank. Not a big deal. She slid 3 stapled pages across the table. I read slowly. Page 1, standard legal language about Ashford Property Holdings, LLC. Ownership structure. Asset description. Nothing alarming. Page 2, more standard language. Occupancy terms. Business operations. Still routine. Page 3, buried in a dense paragraph of legal jargon, halfway down, authorization for the commercial warehouse property located at 1247 Industrial Parkway to serve as approved collateral for expansion financing related to Ashford commercial flooring operations, with full consent of the property owner as documented herein. I closed the folder. This isn't a clarification. Celeste's smile didn't waver. It essentially is. No. I tapped the folder. This allows my warehouse to secure Brent's expansion loan. It formalizes an arrangement that's already existed for years. The business has operated out of that building since. The business operates there. It doesn't own there. Those are different things. Her composure cracked slightly. Just a flicker quickly smoothed over. Lester. She leaned forward, hands folded on the table. You're 68 years old. What do you even need a warehouse for? The question landed like a slap. 68 years old. And my daughter-in-law had just asked me to justify why I deserved to own what I'd spent 40 years building. Wait here, I said. I walked to my office. Pulled the gray metal file box from the closet shelf, the one Margaret had insisted we buy in 2004, because cardboard wasn't good enough for things that mattered. Carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table in front of Celeste. She stared at it like it might bite. I opened the lid, pulled out the deed first, set it in front of her. Read the owner's name, I said. She looked down. Ashford Property Holdings. That's me, not the company. Me. Next, the occupancy agreement. Brent's signature in blue ink below the clause he'd never read. 7 years ago, your husband signed this, agreeing that the property could not be used as collateral without my written permission. Celeste's eyes flicked across the page, then away. I kept pulling documents. The invoices spoke for themselves. Roof replacement, $47,000. My check. My signature. Parking lot repaving, $12,500. My account. 7 years of property tax statements. Everyone paid by Ashford Property Holdings. 7 years of insurance premiums. Commercial liability coverage that cost more than most people's mortgages. Drain repairs, security upgrades, heating system replacement. Every folder a question Brent had never asked. Every receipt proof of something he'd never noticed. Before I show you what was actually in that gray file box, are you still with me? Comment yes if you think Brent knows Celeste is here right now, or no if you think she came behind his back, and add one short reason why in 5 to 10 words. Quick note, the next part includes fictionalized details for emotional impact. The core lesson is what stays. The gray box had been a gift from Margaret. In 2004, she'd insisted on metal fireproof, something that would outlast both of us and protect what mattered most. Celeste sat perfectly still, staring at the pile of documents like they were written in a language she didn't speak. I didn't know, she said finally. Voice quiet. Brent didn't tell you. He said the property was part of the transition, that when you retired and gave him the company, everything transferred together. He was wrong, or you didn't explain it clearly. I met her eyes. I explained it to the lawyer who drafted the documents. I explained it to Joyce, who's managed the books for 30 years. I signed papers that spelled it out in language a 5th grader could understand. The only person who didn't understand was the one who didn't bother to read. She looked away. Where's Brent? I asked. A long pause. At the office. Does he know you're here? Another pause, longer this time. No. The word hung between us, small and damning. She'd come alone. Brought documents claiming to be routine clarifications. Tried to get a signature from her 68-year-old father-in-law on paperwork that would pledge his property to secure her husband's business loan, all without Brent knowing. Celeste's confession hung in the air between us. She'd come alone, brought forged documents, tried to manipulate a signature from her 68-year-old father-in-law, all without her husband knowing. The question was no longer what she'd tried to do. It was why, and whether Brent had sent her, or whether she'd gone rogue to save him from his own negligence. The answer to why Celeste had come alone wasn't what I expected. It was the sound of a house of cards beginning its slow, inevitable collapse. Whose idea was this document? I asked. She looked down at the unsigned papers still sitting between us. Our consultant, financial advisor. Brent trusts him completely. But Brent doesn't know you came here today. No. Why not? Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Her composure, the perfect control she'd worn like armor since the moment she arrived, began showing cracks. Because if I told him I was coming, he would have insisted on coming too. And if he came, you two would have argued. And we don't have time for arguments anymore. Why not? She met my eyes. Because we've already committed to Cincinnati. Deposits on the new facility. Consultants we've paid in full. Equipment reservations that required down payments. None of it's refundable. The kitchen went very quiet. How much? Enough that if the expansion doesn't happen, the company takes a significant hit. Enough that she stopped. Enough that what? Enough that we can't afford for the bank to say no. I leaned back in my chair, processing. The Cincinnati expansion wasn't a plan anymore. It was money already spent, commitments already made. If the expansion fails, I said slowly, who loses their jobs? Celeste blinked. What? The people Brent employs. If the bank denies the loan and the expansion collapses and the company takes this significant hit, you're describing who gets laid off first. Her face changed. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I saw something genuine break through the careful mask. The installation crews, she said quietly. The warehouse staff. The people who... She stopped again. The people with families. Yes, I'd spent 40 years teaching my son the business, but somehow forgot to teach him that other people's livelihoods aren't poker chips you bet on your own ambition. I'll call Preston, I said. My attorney. See if there's a way to, I don't know, stabilize things, but I'm not signing that. I slid the folder back across the table. Celeste picked it up slowly, hands shaking slightly. What am I supposed to tell Brent? The truth, that you tried. She stood, gathered her coat. At the door, she turned back. I'm sorry, she said. About the cake. About Christmas. I wanted everything to be perfect, and you were just trying to help, and Her voice caught. I'm sorry. It was the first genuine thing she'd said to me in years. I know, I said. She left without another word. I didn't learn what Felix had done until weeks later when he told me at the family meeting. But piecing together his account, this is what happened that same Saturday afternoon. My grandson rode his bike alone through the Columbus Industrial District. He'd found the address in his grandfather's study 3 days earlier, written on an envelope he'd seen while looking for stamps. Ashford Property Holdings, 1247 Industrial Parkway. He'd looked it up on his phone, memorized the route. His parents thought he was at the library. The warehouse sat behind a chain-link fence with a rolling gate. A security guard, older guy in a blue uniform, looked up from his phone as Felix approached. Help you, son. I'm just looking. The guard studied him. You're Lester's grandson, aren't you? Saw you at the Christmas party a couple years back. Yeah, your grandpa's not here today, but you can take a look around if you want. Gates open. Felix walked through, bike rolling beside him. The building was bigger than he'd expected. Gray concrete and metal siding, loading docks along one side, office windows reflecting winter sky. But what caught his attention was the sign mounted near the main entrance. Silver metal letters, Ashford Property Holdings. He stared at it for a long time. His dad's company was Ashford Commercial Flooring. He'd seen the trucks, the letterhead, the business cards his dad carried. But this sign said something different. Property Holdings, not commercial flooring. Why were they different? He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the sign, then another closer, making sure the letters were clear. He didn't understand the adult complexities, the difference between owning a building and operating a business inside it, between property and company, between what his father claimed and what his grandfather actually controlled. But he understood that this sign mattered. This was what they were fighting about. He didn't understand why, but he knew it was important. Felix walked around the building, slowly taking in details he couldn't quite name as significant, but felt compelled to remember. The loading docks, the parking lot, the security cameras mounted at the corners. The guard waved as he left. Felix waved back, climbed on his bike, and rode home through streets that felt colder than when he'd left. He didn't tell anyone where he'd been. Felix rode away from the warehouse carrying a photograph that told a truth his father had spent 7 years refusing to read. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Russell. Brent is calling a family meeting this weekend at my house. He wants everyone to hear both sides. I read it twice. Both sides, as if there were 2 versions of documented property ownership. The family meeting never happened. Russell called 2 days later to say Brent had postponed it. Something about work being busy, the bank needing documents. He'd reschedule soon. I didn't push, just waited. The phone rang at 9:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, never a good sign. Brent's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about Felix's face on that video call asking if I was okay. About Celeste sitting at my kitchen table with her hands shaking. About Margaret's note warning me not to give everything away. I picked up. Dad. His voice was tight, breathless. The bank needs your signature by tomorrow. They need to confirm the warehouse belongs to Ashford Commercial Flooring. I sat down slowly in Margaret's reading chair. But it doesn't, I said. Silence. Long, hollow silence that stretched across the phone line like a chasm opening. What do you mean it doesn't? The warehouse belongs to Ashford Property Holdings, not Ashford Commercial Flooring. The deed's been in my name since we purchased it in 2006. He stopped, started again. That's a technicality. You gave me the company. The property goes with it. I gave you the business operations, not the building. Why would you? His voice rose, panic bleeding through. Why would you keep them separate? Because your mother insisted. Because it protected both of us. Because I wanted you to succeed on your merits, not because I handed you assets you could leverage without understanding. The bank won't approve the loan without... I know. Dad, I've already committed to Cincinnati. Deposits, equipment, contractors. If this loan doesn't... He stopped. I could hear him breathing, trying to control something that was already spiraling. If the loan doesn't come through, what happens? I asked quietly. Another silence. I don't know, he said finally. I need to think. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the blank screen. One sentence. 5 words. The foundation of his entire empire crumbling in a breath. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number, different tone. I found something, Brent said. His voice was quieter now, steadier. I need to tell you about it. Okay. That photo album, the one you brought Christmas Eve. I found it this morning. I'd forgotten about the album. Left it wrapped in silver paper under his tree the night Celeste told me my dirty hands had contaminated her cake. A lifetime ago, measured in humiliation and revelation. I didn't know what it was. Brent continued. Just saw silver wrapping paper behind the couch where one of the kids must have kicked it. Opened it this morning. I waited. It's Mom's photos, from her craft room. The leather album she kept on the top shelf. I spent 4 months organizing them, I said. Thought the kids should have them. The last page. His voice caught. There's a photo of Mom and me at the warehouse when you first bought it. I remembered that day. June 2006. Margaret insisting we take pictures, even though it was just an empty building with good bones and terrible lighting. Brent had driven down from his apartment to see what we'd purchased, back when he was still learning the business from the ground up instead of the executive suite. There's writing on the back, Brent said. Your handwriting. I closed my eyes. I knew what it said. I'd written it the day after Margaret died, when I was sorting through photos and trying to remember what mattered. What does it say? I asked anyway. The day we bought it. Mom said someday this will matter more than you think. Margaret always said memories were seeds we plant, without knowing what will grow. Now she knew, Brent said quietly. Didn't she? She knew you were keeping the property separate. She knew what you were doing. She insisted on it, I said. Wouldn't let me put it in the company name. Said you needed room to build something yourself, not just inherit a finished empire. Not I thought. He stopped. I've been telling everyone you're being irrational, that you're punishing me for Christmas, that losing Mom changed you and you're not thinking clearly anymore. I know. You knew about the email. Someone forwarded it to me. And you didn't. You just let me keep saying those things. Thought, what was I supposed to do? Defend myself to people who'd already decided I was the problem, force you to face the truth before you were ready. The silence this time was different. Not hollow. Just heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. I'm sorry, he said finally. About Christmas, about the email, about... His voice broke. About all of it. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just the beginning of space where forgiveness might eventually fit. The bank, I said. When do they need an answer? Tomorrow, by close of business. And if I don't sign, the loan doesn't happen, Cincinnati doesn't happen. I figure out how to, I don't know. Absorb the deposits we've already lost, scale back, maybe lay off some people. People with families. Yeah, I thought about Preston's lease proposal. 3-year term, fair market rate, purchase option after 2 years. A bridge between what was and what could be. There's another option, I said. His voice dropped to something I hadn't heard in years. Not anger, not demand. Uncertainty. Can Celeste and I come over? He asked. I need to understand what Mom knew. Tomorrow morning, I said. 8 o'clock. Bring coffee if you want. This might take a while. They arrived at 8 a.m. with a leather folder and matching expressions of resolve. No coffee, just the folder and a determination that felt practiced, rehearsed. Celeste wore the same cream coat from her last visit. Brent looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed. We sat at the kitchen table without pleasantries. Brent slid the folder across to me. The bank needs this signed by Monday. It's the same document Celeste showed you before. We had our attorney review it again. Everything's legitimate. I opened it, read slowly. Page 1, page 2, the same language I'd seen before. Page 3. The clause buried in paragraph 7. Nobody's asking you to give anything away, Dad. Celeste's voice was measured, careful. Just paperwork to reflect how the business has always operated. The business hasn't operated like this, I said. The business has operated rent-free in a building it doesn't own, which you provided, Brent said. You gave me the company. The warehouse was part of that. The warehouse was never part of that. I gave you the business operations, the customer relationships, the equipment, the name, not the property. Celeste leaned forward. This document simply formalizes. Look, this document allows the warehouse to be used as collateral for your Cincinnati expansion loan. I tapped page 3. That's not formalization. That's leverage. It's smart business, she said. What happens if the Cincinnati project fails? I looked at Brent. The lender seizes the collateral. It won't fail, Celeste said quickly. But if it does, it won't. I closed the folder, pushed it back across the table. I hope you're right, but I'm not signing this. Brent's jaw tightened. Then we lose the loan. Cincinnati doesn't happen. We've already committed. I know what you've committed, Celeste told me. They looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. You came here, Brent asked her. I was trying to. She stopped. Yes. 3 pages of legalese. 1 clause that changed everything. Wait here, I said. I went to my office, brought back the gray file box, set it on the table between us. Brent stared at it like it might explode. I opened the lid, pulled out the deed first. Read the name on the owner line, I said. Out loud. Brent picked it up. His eyes scanned the document. Ashford Property Holdings. He read quietly. Not commercial flooring. That's right. I set the deed aside. Now these. I pulled out a stack of printed emails. 6 pages. 7 years of correspondence between Brent and Joyce about property matters, insurance renewals, tax assessments, maintenance schedules, legal filings. Brent's replies printed in black ink. Handle it. Later. Dad knows. Whatever you think is best. And my personal favorite, a thumbs-up emoji in response to a 9-page legal document about LLC restructuring. 7 years of correspondence. I said. 6 pages of replies. Tell me which one shows you cared about what you're now calling yours. Brent picked up the pages, read through them slowly. Celeste leaned over his shoulder, reading along. I watched my son's face change as he confronted his own negligence spelled out in his own words. The casual dismissals, the delegated responsibility, the assumption that someone else would handle the details that didn't interest him. I don't even remember half of these, he whispered. That was the problem. He didn't remember, didn't know, didn't ask. 7 years of treating ownership as a formality instead of a responsibility. Silence has a sound when a man sees proof he was never the person he believed himself to be. I thought... Brent set the emails down carefully. I thought when you gave me the company, everything transferred. The business, the building, the everything. The business transferred, not the property. Your mother insisted we keep them separate. Why? Because she wanted you to build something that was yours, not just inherit something that was ours. Celeste stood, first folder forgotten on the table. Her composure was finally completely broken. We should go. Brent stayed seated, staring at his own words in black ink. The thumbs-up emoji seemed to mock him from the page. My phone buzzed. A text from Russell. Sunday, 2 p.m. Everyone's coming. Time to settle this. I looked at the message. Then at my son across the table, shoulders slumped, face pale. There's a family meeting, I said. Sunday at Russell's, 2 o'clock. Brent looked up. I know, I called it. You called it. 3 days ago. Before I found Mom's album. Before I... He gestured at the emails. I wanted everyone to hear my side. How you were being unreasonable. How you were punishing me over Christmas. And now, he was quiet for a long moment. Oh, now I don't know what I'm going to say. Celeste touched his shoulder. We should go. They left without taking the folder. It sat on my kitchen table next to the gray box, next to the deed, next to 6 pages of evidence that my son had spent 7 years not paying attention. I wondered which version of him would show up Sunday. The one who'd written those emails. The one who'd questioned my competence to 14 family members. Or the one who'd called last night asking to understand what his mother knew. I didn't know which one I hoped for. Just knew that in 48 hours, the entire family would be watching to see who my son had chosen to become. Sunday arrived faster than I wanted it to. Russell's dining room had never held this many people or this much silence. The extended family filled every chair, leaned against walls, balanced coffee cups on knees. Russell and Joyce at the head of the table. Brent and Celeste on one side, both dressed like they were attending a business meeting. Walter and Diane Clark, Celeste's parents, beside them. Diane's real estate background evident in how she studied the room like she was appraising it. Aunt Linda, Margaret's older sister, who'd flown in from Phoenix, watched from the corner with the sharp attention of someone who'd seen family fractures before. Felix sat at the far end doing homework, or pretending to his 12-year-old attention, clearly pulled toward the adult tension filling the room. I sat alone on the other side, the gray file box at my feet. Brent stood, cleared his throat, pulled a note card from his pocket. I asked everyone here because... He paused, looked at the card. Since Mom passed, Dad's made some decisions that, frankly, don't make sense. I'm worried he's not thinking clearly. Nods around the room, sympathetic murmurs. He's threatened to charge me rent on a building I've operated out of for 7 years. He's questioned my competence. Brent's voice caught. I don't know what happened to him, but the father I knew wouldn't do this. More nods. Aunt Linda's face was carefully neutral. Brent sat down. Celeste touched his arm. I waited. Let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Can I ask some questions? My voice was quiet, but carried. Russell looked at Brent. Brent nodded. I turned to Celeste. Christmas Eve. Did I touch your cake? She blinked. What? Did I touch your cake, yes or no? Yes, but... Did I apologize? Yes. Did I argue with you, raise my voice, make excuses? No. Thank you. I turned to Brent. What did you say after I apologized? The room went completely still. Brent, Russell prompted gently. What did you say to Dad? Brent looked down at his hands. I told him to leave. After I'd apologized twice, I said quietly. For an accident. For trying to help steady a platter that was falling. Diane Clark sat back in her chair. Aunt Linda set her coffee cup down carefully. Truth doesn't need volume. It only needs the right question at the right moment. Can I show everyone something? I asked. I pulled the gray file box onto the table. Opened it. The entire room leaned forward slightly. I didn't bring out the deed. Didn't bring out all the invoices and tax statements. Just 2 items. First, a single page Joyce had prepared. A summary. 7 years of property expenses in neat columns. Property taxes, insurance, major repairs, routine maintenance. Each year totaled. The final line bolded estimated market rent forgone across the same period. I slid it to Russell. Read it out loud, I said. Please. Russell picked it up. His eyes scanned the page. Widened slightly. 7 years of property expenses. He read slowly. Paid by Ashford Property Holdings. He looked up. That's you, Dad. That's me. He continued reading. Line by line, year by year. When he reached the final bolded total, he stopped. You knew about all this? He asked Brent. Brent didn't answer. Second item, the 6 pages of Brent's email replies. I set them on the table in front of my son. 7 years of correspondence. I said, every insurance notice, every property tax bill, every repair estimate. Read them. Brent picked up the pages. The room watched him read his own words. Handle it. Later. Dad knows. Now, whatever you think is best. The thumbs up emoji to a 9-page legal document. Celeste leaned over to read them. Her face changed as she processed what she was seeing. Walter Clark read over his daughter's shoulder. Diane's expression shifted from defensive to calculating. I don't even... Brent set the pages down. His hands were shaking. I don't remember half of these emails. I know, I said. The silence that followed was complete. Not empty. Just full of things no one knew how to say. 4 words can unravel years of assumptions. He isn't lying, Brent said quietly. Celeste turned to look at him. What? He isn't lying. Brent's voice was stronger now. I never read the documents, never asked about ownership, never questioned who was paying for what. He gestured helplessly at the emails. I assumed it was all mine. I assumed wrong. Brent. Celeste's voice carried a warning. No. He looked at her, then at me. I told 14 people you weren't thinking clearly, that you needed help managing your own affairs, that Mom's death had changed you. But you've been managing everything, the building, the expenses, the legal structure. And I've been... He couldn't finish the sentence. The room exhaled collectively. Joyce started clearing coffee cups, giving people something to do with their hands. Russell stared at the expense summary like it might change if he looked long enough. Then Felix looked up from the documents spread across the table and asked the question no adult had dared. Grandpa, he said, voice clear in the quiet room, if Uncle Brent doesn't own the warehouse, who does? Every adult in the room turned to look at the 12-year-old, who just asked what none of them had. Felix glanced around, suddenly aware of all the attention focused on him. What I'm just asking. Felix. Russell started his teacher voice kicking in automatically. No, it's okay. I leaned forward slightly, meeting my grandson's eyes. What makes you ask, buddy? Because I went to Grandpa's warehouse last month, when Uncle Brent took me there to see where he works. Felix looked at Brent, utterly innocent. Remember you showed me the loading docks and the office and where the trucks park? Brent nodded slowly, face draining of color. Well, I saw the sign out front, the big silver one mounted above the doors. Felix pulled out his phone, swiped through his photos, turned the screen toward the table. This one. The photo showed the warehouse entrance clear as day. Sharp focus. The sign mounted above the main doors, Ashford Property Holdings. The sign says, Property Holdings. Felix said, looking around the table like he was explaining something obvious to adults who should already know. But Uncle Brent's company is Ashford Commercial Flooring. I've seen his trucks. The logos are different. They're different names. So I'm asking, why are they different? Don't they mean the same thing? The room went dead silent. Brent stared at his son. The very question he'd neglected to ask for 7 years, the basic curiosity he'd never exercised, the simple observation he'd never made a 12-year-old, had asked it on his first visit to the building. How many board meetings, lawyer consultations, and sleepless nights could have been avoided by one child's field trip curiosity? Russell let out a sound, not quite a laugh, more like relief finding its way out through surprise. That is... He shook his head, almost smiling. That is actually the exact right question. It is an excellent question, buddy, I said to Felix. And the answer is simple. Property Holdings is the company that owns the building. Commercial Flooring is the company that operates the business inside the building. Your Uncle Brent runs Commercial Flooring. I own Property Holdings. Felix processed this, his face showing the calculation. So Uncle Brent works in Grandpa's building. Yes. Does he pay rent? Out of the mouths of children. Not currently, I said. But we're working on that. Felix nodded like this made perfect sense. Oh. Okay. He went back to his homework as if he hadn't just asked the question that exposed the entire conflict. The adults sat in stunned silence, watching a 12-year-old solve in 30 seconds what they'd been arguing about for weeks. Joyce stood first, started gathering plates that didn't need gathering. Anyone want more coffee? The meeting dissolved after that. No dramatic exits, no shouting, no final confrontations. Just people standing, collecting coats, making excuses about early mornings and long drives home. Brent and Celeste left, without saying goodbye. Walter and Diane Clark followed shortly after. Diane's expression, carefully neutral, her real estate expertise, clearly processing what she'd witnessed. Aunt Linda hugged me on her way out. Margaret would be proud, she whispered close to my ear. Not of the fight, of how you handled it. I drove home through light snow, the gray file box on the passenger seat beside me, Felix's photograph, still sharp in my memory. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized, careful block letters with the deliberate concentration of someone still learning cursive. I opened it, standing in the driveway, breath fogging in the February cold. Inside, a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind with 3 holes punched on the left side. Torn carefully along the perforation so the edges were clean. So, Grandpa, I don't think your hands are dirty. Love, Felix. P.S. I took a picture of the sign. I read it twice standing there in the cold. Then I walked to the garage, sat down on the threshold between the concrete and the driveway, and read it a 3rd time. Celeste's voice echoed in my memory from Christmas Eve. Your dirty hands touched my Christmas cake. Felix's words written in careful blue ink on lined paper. I don't think your hands are dirty. I sat there for 15 minutes holding that piece of notebook paper while the garage got colder and the afternoon sun moved across the driveway, casting my shadow longer. Sometimes vindication arrives not in courtrooms or family meetings, but in lined notebook paper and 12-year-old handwriting. The PS made me smile, despite everything. Felix had documented the evidence, taken a photograph of the ownership structure that his father had ignored for 7 years. A 12-year-old had done more due diligence on a single visit than a business owner had done in nearly a decade of operations. I folded the letter carefully along the original creases, put it in my wallet right next to Margaret's note from the gray file box. 2 pieces of paper. 2 people who saw clearly what others had missed. 3 days after the meeting, my phone rang. Brent's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. My finger hovered over the decline button, remembering the last dozen conversations we'd had. Then I thought about Felix's letter, about Margaret's note, about the choice between being angry and being disappointed. I picked up. "Hello, Dad." His voice was different. Not angry, not defensive. Quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Can we talk, just the 2 of us? About what?" "About everything. About Mom. About the warehouse. About—" He paused and I heard him take a breath. "About what kind of father I want to be when Felix asks me the hard questions." I looked at the letter still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd left it this morning. When I asked, "Now I'm in the car. I can be there in 20 minutes, if that's okay." No Celeste, no lawyers, no audience, no performance. Just my son asking to talk. "Okay," I said. "I'll put coffee on." Brent came over that night. We talked for 2 hours. Then he asked if we could meet again the next morning somewhere neutral, somewhere without history in every room. Brent was already sitting in the back booth when I arrived, coffee untouched and going cold. Sunny Street Cafe hadn't changed since the 80s. Same vinyl booths, same laminate tables, same smell of bacon and burnt toast. A diner where Margaret and I used to bring the boys for pancakes on Saturday mornings when they were small enough to still think diners were exciting. I slid into the booth across from him. 8 a.m. on a Friday. No documents on the table, no agenda. Just my son and 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks for coming," he said. "You asked." The waitress brought me coffee without asking. Poured it black the way I'd ordered it for 40 years. Left the pot. Brent stared at his cup. "I've been trying to figure out where to start. The beginning usually works." The beginning was Mom's funeral." He looked up. "I was 33. You handed me the keys to the company. Told me it was time. That I was ready." "You were." I wasn't." His voice was quiet. "I was 33 years old, running a company I barely understood, coming home every night, wondering if I was ruining everything you and Mom built. Every decision felt like I was one mistake away from destroying 40 years of your work." I'd never heard him say this. "I didn't know," I said. I didn't tell you. Didn't tell anyone. Just pretended I had it figured out. Signed things Joyce put in front of me. Nodded when lawyers explained structures I didn't fully understand. Told myself that's what you did. You trusted the professionals, delegated the details, focused on the big picture. That's not what I did. I know that now." He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. "When you transferred the business, I told myself it was everything. The company, the building, the whole operation. Because it was easier than admitting I didn't actually know what I owned or how any of it worked. There it was. Not malice, not greed, fear. Apologies are easy. They're just words shaped by regret. Accountability is harder. It requires standing still while someone else decides whether to believe you've changed." On that night, Christmas Eve, Brent's voice dropped. "You apologized. Twice. And I chose Celeste over you, even though you'd already done everything right. Even though the only person who'd done anything wrong was her. And me. Why? Because..." He stopped. Started again. Because it was easier than admitting my wife was wrong in front of 30 people. Because I'd spent 7 years building this image of having it all together. The successful business, the perfect family, the house in Westerville. He looked at me across the table. I treated you like your only value was what you'd eventually leave behind. I'm sorry. The waitress refilled our cups. Neither of us had touched them. I forgive you, I said. His eyes closed briefly. But forgiveness isn't the same as going backward, I continued. It's not pretending Christmas didn't happen. It's not forgetting that you questioned my competence to 14 people. What matters is who you are next month. 6 months from now. Next Christmas. I know. Do you? Brent reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded document. Walter reviewed this. Celeste's father. His background is engineering, not law, but he's got a good eye for contracts. He unfolded it on the table between us. It's the lease, the one your attorney drew up. 3-year term, 10% below market value, clear maintenance responsibilities, no collateral clause. Purchase option after 2 years based on independent appraisal. I recognized Preston Ballard's letterhead at the top. I signed it yesterday, Brent said. Here, his signature in dark blue ink. There's something else. He took a breath. I canceled the Cincinnati expansion. I set down my coffee cup carefully. The deposits are gone, non-refundable. The consulting fees we'd already paid, the equipment reservations, all of it. His voice was steady. Lost about $80,000 in sunk costs, and my pride. What about the Columbus business? Healthy, profitable. We've got good crews, solid contracts, clients who've been with us for years. We don't need Cincinnati. I wanted Cincinnati because it felt like proof I was growing the company instead of just maintaining what you built. 2 signatures on 1 lease. 7 years of distance closed in dark blue ink. I pulled a pen from my pocket, clicked it, signed my name next to his. Your mother would have approved of this conversation, I said. Brent smiled for the first time that morning. She would have forced us to have it 6 months ago, probably 6 years ago. We finished our coffee, split a check that came to $12, stood in the parking lot for a moment before going to our separate cars. Dad, Brent said. Yeah, thank you for not giving up. I drove home with the signed lease on the passenger seat, the same spot where the gray file box had sat so many times over the past 2 months. 1 month later, my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Joyce's voice, careful and measured. Lester, do you have a minute? It's about Russell and Brent. My chest tightened. What happened? Nothing bad, she said quickly. Something unexpected. Spring was beginning to show when Celeste appeared at my door, clutching a bakery bag like a shield. I'd been home maybe 20 minutes still in my work jacket. Through the screen door, I could see her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture careful. She didn't look like the woman who'd called me a liar in my own living room 3 months ago. She looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Lester, she said quietly. Do you have a minute? I opened the door. Come in. She set the bakery bag on my kitchen counter, chocolate croissants from the place on 5th Street, and turned to face me. Her hands twisted together. I owe you an apology, she said. A real one. Not the kind Brent told me I should give. The kind I should have given months ago. I waited. I said your hands weren't clean. Celeste continued. Her voice was steady but quiet. I said it in front of Felix and Pearl. And I was wrong. Not just wrong about the facts. Brent explained what really happened with the warehouse, with the partnership papers, all of it. I was wrong about you. And I'm sorry. She took a breath. I don't want Felix and Pearl growing up thinking that getting older means you're less trustworthy or less sharp or that your word means less. That's not what I want to teach them. And I'm ashamed that I let them hear me say something like that about their grandfather. I'd imagined this moment a dozen different ways. In some versions, I was cold. In others, I was gracious. But standing there in my kitchen with Celeste looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, all I felt was tired. I appreciate you saying that, I told her. And I accept your apology. She nodded, blinking fast. Thank you. She hesitated. Felix has been asking about you, about the warehouse. He wants to know how things are built. He's welcome any time, I said. Both of them are. Celeste's shoulders dropped, like she'd been holding them up by sheer will. Thank you, she said again. Then she left the croissants still sitting on my counter. 2 weeks later, Joyce called with an update I hadn't expected. Ma, Brent paid the rent early, she said. I could hear the smile in her voice. 5 days early, and he's been asking Russell questions. What kind of questions? Me, business questions. How Russell structures his consulting contracts. How he handles clients who try to renegotiate terms halfway through a project. Brent said he's been operating on instinct for 10 years, and he wants to learn how to do it right. I sat down at my kitchen table. Russell's helping him every Sunday, Joyce said. They meet for coffee. Russell says Brent's taking notes. What do you do when the ending you expected doesn't arrive? When the disaster you braced for turns into something quieter, something that looks almost like hope? You keep moving. That's all you can do. The first Saturday in April, Felix showed up at the warehouse with a notebook and 3 sharpened pencils. Brent had called the night before. Felix wants to spend the day with you, he'd said. If that's okay. He's been talking about learning the business. I told him he's 12, he should be playing baseball or video games, but he says he wants to see how you do things. Send him over, I'd said. So Felix arrived at 8 in the morning wearing work boots, 2 sizes too big, and a Seahawks cap. I showed him the inventory system, the way we tagged materials by date received by supplier by project designation. I taught him how to read a tape measure, how to check lumber for warp, how to calculate board feet. He asked questions the whole time. Good questions. Why do you order from 3 different suppliers instead of 1? What happens if a client changes their mind after you've already cut the materials? How do you know if someone's trying to cheat you on a quote? By noon, his notebook had 4 pages of notes in cramped handwriting. This is harder than I thought, he said, sitting on a stack of plywood with a sandwich Brent had packed. There's a lot of math. There's a lot of everything, I told him. Math people skills, timing, luck. But the math you can learn. He looked at me seriously. Will you teach me? Yes, I said. As much as you want to learn. That night, my phone buzzed with a text. Felix's number. She, Grandpa. I want to learn how you built everything. Not just the warehouse. Everything. Can I come back next Saturday, Chakram? I typed back every Saturday if you want. 3 dots appeared then, deal. Spring turned into summer. Felix showed up every Saturday, his notebook growing thicker. Brent paid rent on time, sometimes early. Russell reported that the Sunday coffee meetings were still happening. Celeste sent a card in May with a photo of Pearl holding a lopsided birdhouse she'd built with Felix's help. I kept working, kept teaching Felix, kept meeting Russell for lunch once a month and Joyce for coffee when her schedule allowed. The warehouse hummed along, no expansion to Cincinnati, no grand visions, just steady work and steady income, and a lease agreement that both sides honored. The next Christmas arrived faster than I expected, and this time everyone showed up early. 1 year later, I stood in the same driveway, holding the same cake, and the weight of it in my hands felt entirely different from what it had the year before. The Christmas lights still wrapped themselves around the maple trees, in long, glowing strands. The snow still fell in thick, unhurried flakes, the kind that settle on your shoulders and your eyelashes before you even notice they've arrived. The brick walkway still led to the same front door, the same brass knocker, the same wreath of pine and red berries. Everything looked the same. But when I climbed out of my F-150 with the Yule log cake balanced carefully in one hand and a gift bag hanging from the other, not a single curtain stirred. Not a single person inside was bracing themselves for what I might say or do. Not a single soul was watching me with that particular mixture of obligation and dread that I had grown so familiar with. That was the difference. Not the lights, not the snow, not the brick. The difference was in what couldn't be seen. I had brought Felix the train expansion he'd been asking about for nearly 6 months. The Northern Pacific set with the mountain tunnel, the one with the hand-painted locomotive, and the detailed freight cars he'd shown me a picture of back in June, circling it in red marker, like a boy who still believed that wanting something badly enough was reason enough to receive it. He wasn't wrong, as it turned out. For Pearl, I'd brought a handmade jewelry box that Russell and I had spent 3 evenings finishing together in the warehouse, sanding the wood until it was smooth as riverstone, staining it a deep cherry red that caught the light in a way that reminded me of the furniture Margaret used to admire in shop windows. And then there was the cake. Same bakery. Same rich chocolate ganache and buttercream frosting, the kind that tastes like someone put real effort into it, because they did. Same festive ribbon around the box, tied just as carefully as the year before. The door opened before I reached it. Celeste stood in the doorway, wearing a green sweater. Her hair pulled back, her expression sitting somewhere between guarded and open, a place I recognized, because I'd lived in that same place myself for most of the past year. She looked at the cake in my hands. I looked at her. For a long moment, neither of us said anything at all, and the snow fell quietly between us, like it was trying to fill a silence it didn't fully understand. Then she stepped back and pulled the door wide open. "Come in, Lester," she said. Her voice carried none of the performance that had marked our interactions for years. No warmth manufactured to smooth over tension, no cold precision designed to keep me at arm's length. It was simply real, the voice of a woman who had made a decision and was standing behind it, telling me I was welcome here. Not because she had to, but because something had genuinely shifted. I stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon, and something sweet baking somewhere in the back. Felix appeared around the corner before I'd even set the cake down, his eyes bright, the way children's eyes are when they've been waiting for something and can finally see it arriving. "Grandpa, you brought the train expansion." "I did," I said, handing him the gift bag. "Russell tells me you've been practicing your measurements, so let's see whether you can put the tunnel together without looking at the instructions." He grinned with his whole face and disappeared back into the living room, already pulling tissue paper from the bag as he walked. Pearl appeared at my elbow, quieter and more deliberate than her brother, the way she had always been. "Is that for me?" she asked, her eyes on the wooden box under my arm. "It is," I said, crouching down to her level and placing it in her hands. "Your Grandma Margaret used to make boxes like this one. She had a whole collection of them on her dresser. I thought you should have one of your own." She opened it with careful small fingers, tracing the grain of the wood along the lid. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Not performed gratitude, not the automatic politeness children are coached to perform for adults. She meant it, and I felt it land somewhere deep and quiet inside my chest. Brent appeared in the hallway with a dish towel over his shoulder, the way a man looks when he's been in the kitchen long enough to forget he's carrying it. He looked at me. He looked at the cake. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite relief. It was something harder to name than either of those things. "Dad." he said quietly. You didn't have to bring that. I know, I said, but I wanted to. He nodded, and we left it there. No lengthy apology, no carefully rehearsed speech, just the simple acknowledgement between two people who had both been through something difficult and come out the other side still standing. Russell and Joyce were already at the dining table helping set out plates and glasses. The whole family had come, aunts and uncles, cousins I hadn't seen, since we'd all stood together at Margaret's graveside, people whose faces carried years of shared history in them. The room hummed with the kind of conversation and laughter that only happens when people feel genuinely safe with one another, when no one is managing anyone else or measuring their words before speaking them. Dinner was loud and warm and full of the small, ordinary moments that make up a life. Pearl walked her jewelry box around the table and showed it to every single person there, opening and closing the lid so they could see how smoothly it moved on its hinges. Felix explained the Northern Pacific Railway route with the total confidence of someone who had been studying maps for months and considered himself something of an authority on the subject, which, to his credit, he was. Celeste passed dishes across the table without hesitation, without the careful distance she'd maintained for years. Brent asked Russell a question about how contract disputes get resolved when both parties believe they're in the right, the kind of question that tells you a man is still learning, still trying to understand how the world works, so he can navigate it with more integrity than he has before. And in the center of the long table, surrounded by all of that warmth and noise and food and family, sat the Yule log cake, untouched. The chocolate ganache gleaming softly in the candlelight, the buttercream frosting perfect and unbroken, a silver knife resting beside the box, with its blade pointed away from no one in particular. When the dishes had been cleared, and the coffee poured, and the table wiped down, Brent stood up. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone is about to say or do something that everyone present can sense matters. He picked up the silver knife. I watched him, and I noticed the old reflex rise in me, that long-practiced bracing, that quiet preparation for disappointment, and then I noticed it fall away before it could take hold. He held the knife for a moment. Every other year since Margaret had died, Brent had cut the cake himself. He had taken on the role of host, the head of the family, the one who stood at the center of things and made the decisions. It was a role he had claimed, sometimes gracefully and sometimes not, but he had always claimed it. He walked around the table and stopped beside my chair. He set the knife down in front of me, handle first, the way you hand something to someone you trust. "Ta-da," he said. "You first!" No one moved. The room was absolutely still. Even the children seemed to understand, without being told, that something important was happening. A knife placed handle first toward someone who had been asked to leave through the same front door the year before, that is not a small gesture. That is restitution measured in silverware and humility. That is a son telling his father in the only language some things can be spoken, "I was wrong. You were right. You belong here." I looked at the cake. Last year, it had sat in a Kroger bag in the snow. Outside this very house, the ribbon crushed the box, dented at one corner, while I sat alone in the cab of my truck, trying to understand how I had become a man my own son could turn away at the door. I had driven to a parking lot and sat there in the dark with the heater running, eating a gas station sandwich, thinking about Margaret, and wondering whether I had spent 40 years building something or simply accumulating things. This year the cake sat at the center of everything whole and beautiful and waiting. I took the knife. I cut the first slice the way Margaret used to do it, the blade moving through the layers of chocolate and cream with clean, deliberate care, the way you do things when you understand their value. Pearl clapped her hands together. Felix nodded with the gravity of someone twice his age. Celeste met my eyes from across the table and held them there steady and clear. For the first time in more years than I wanted to count, No one at that table was looking at me like a problem they had inherited and didn't know how to solve. They were looking at me like a father, a grandfather, a man who had stood his ground when it would have been easier to retreat and had earned his place back at the center of his own family. I stayed until the cake was finished and the coffee had gone cold, and Pearl had fallen asleep on the living room couch with her jewelry box held against her chest. Her fingers still curled lightly around its lid. Then I said my goodbyes, pulled on my coat, shook Brent's hand at the door, and stepped back out into the snow. The drive home was quiet. My fingers ached from the cold and the arthritis that had been creeping steadily into my knuckles for the past few winters, but I didn't pull off the road this time. I didn't sit in a parking lot trying to piece together where everything had gone wrong. I drove straight home, hung my coat on the hook by the door, put a fresh pot of coffee on, and sat down at the kitchen table in the dark before I thought to turn the light on. The house was quiet. The snow continued to fall outside the window. Steam rose from my cup in slow, unhurried curls. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the lessons she had spent years trying to pass on to Brent. That gratitude was not optional, that responsibility came hand in hand with inheritance. That the things you are given must be honored, or they lose their meaning. She had been patient with him in ways I hadn't always managed to be. She had believed he would eventually understand. She was right. Margaret, I said quietly to the empty kitchen. Getting older isn't easy. People notice the slower steps before they think to remember the stronger years. But sometimes, if you hold your position long enough, if you refuse to disappear, they remember. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter, and exactly what I needed. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. Legacy is what you teach people to value while you're still here, to see whether they've learned it. The most valuable thing I ever gave my son wasn't the company or the warehouse or the decades of work that built both of them. It was the lesson that gratitude and responsibility must always accompany what is inherited, and the willingness to let him learn that the hard way, even when the hard way, was hard for me too. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee was hot. The lesson had finally completely taken hold, and for the first time since Margaret died, I sat in my own house without bracing for what might come next. I was simply present in the peace that we had all worked in our separate and imperfect ways to build. And to you listening to my story, remember this: standing firm when you're right doesn't make you the villain. Sometimes it's the only way to teach what matters. Looking back, I could have handled things differently. Maybe I should have shown Brent the documents before Christmas Eve. But would he have listened? Would he have learned about gratitude and responsibility if the cost hadn't been so high? I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes love requires boundaries, even when those boundaries feel cruel in the moment. The lesson I learned, and I hope you take with you, is that family justice isn't about winning. It's about teaching the people you love to value what they've been given. These dad's revenge stories people share online often end in bitterness, but mine didn't have to. My son thought he was entitled to everything without gratitude. When you face something similar in your pursuit of family justice, don't back down just to keep peace. Real peace comes from honest foundations. I believe God guided me through this, so I could raise a grandson who understands legacy means responsibility. That's worth everything. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand firm with family over what was right? Share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more dad's revenge stories with real lessons, please subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means the world to me, and I read every single comment you leave. Thank you for staying until the very end. It takes courage to listen to hard truths about family justice. One final note: some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling, but the core lesson that inheritance must be paired with gratitude and responsibility is absolutely real.